everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this session on Mohammed bin Salman, the Icarus of Saudi Arabia. This is a book title. Book was authored by David Ottaway. I have David Ottaway with me today to discuss his book. I'm hearing myself, so I'm sorry. Can you take this? My apologies. So David Ottaway is a Middle East fellow with Wilson Center. He's an expert of Saudi Arabia. He's well known in this field. He's been going to Saudi Arabia since the 70s. So he has decades of experience understanding, true understanding of Saudi Arabia and the regional dynamics, of course. This book is a welcome addition to recent analyses and books on Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And obviously, he is a controversial character, to say the least. He's a young, up-and-coming leader in the Middle East. And if he succeeds his father, King Salman, he'll be there potentially for the decades to come. And Saudi Arabia has always been an important player in this region, and they will continue to play this role, and they will help determine the fate of the region in many ways. In the context of US trying to reduce its footprint in the Middle East, reduce its responsibilities and its impact, again, in the context of ending the forever wars in the Middle East, we have very interesting dynamics. We have a lot to talk about. This book is, I think, really well written, and it contextualizes pretty much all aspects of Mohammed bin Salman. Congratulations on the book, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with this Icarus comparison. So the title of the book, Mohammed bin Salman, the Icarus of Saudi Arabia, question mark. How is he an Icarus in your mind?
Well, I thought about a title. I thought about another title, which would have been The Quest, Saudi Arabia's Quest for Power and Glory. But the year 2018 was just extraordinary, because this young prince came to the United States, came to Washington. He did the best job of selling himself as the worthy coming king of Saudi Arabia. Usually when Saudi royals come to Washington, they hide away from the press. They don't want to talk to anybody. They come and see the president and other people in the government. They have a dinner and they invite people, but they don't appear anywhere. Crown Prince, now Crown Prince, not then Crown Prince, 2000, Deputy Crown Prince. When he came here, he sought out the media. He went to the editorial boards of the Post, Washington Post, the New York Times, LA Times, the Wall Street Journal. He held dinners for everybody in Washington or across the country who were interested in Saudi Arabia. He saw the titans of Wall Street and the titans of California, the Silicon Valley. I mean, he really he did an incredible job. And he went to Harvard and MIT and the major universities. I mean, he'd never seen anything like this before. It was a spectacle, and it was spectacular. And then a few months later, he authorizes, or the CIA says, approve of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi inside the consulate, this temple of Saudi Arabia, and his whole image just totally collapsed. And even in the Arab world, when he went on a tour of the Arab world in, I think, October, late October, November, two monarchs, monarch of Morocco and the monarch of Jordan, would not receive him. I mean, he was These were his closest friends who would not see him. So the fall was just really dramatic. And, I was trying to think, what's comparable to sort of historical, all this mythology, Icarus, but, Icarus struck me as in the magnitude of Mohammed bin Salman's fall from international grace. It was like Icarus, or he was like Icarus, trying to, fly high and to the heights of international diplomacy, and then he just collapses and does this, and nobody wants to deal with it. It's just a dramatic fall.
Very striking sort of comparison I'm trying to find the word that I'm failing, but you describe how his father helps, just like in a mythology creature.
Yes.
To
Daedalus.
yes, Daedalus. His wings are put together, are glued together, thanks to his father. So I want to come to that discussion later. But for the Saudi ruling structure, you identified three things, important things that MBS has done so far. This is right at the introduction. You say he ended basically consensus building in decision making. He ended various fiefdoms within the Saudi royal family, and then he centralized power. These are, can we expand on these for our viewers?
Sure. I mean, the king has always had the final say in Saudi Arabia, but the king previously consulted with all the senior princes, which usually meant the minister of Interior, the defense minister, governor of Riyadh, which used to be King Salman for decades. But he would consult and try and get within the family consensus before making major decisions. And this resulted in kind of, almost like fiefdoms inside the government. The Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense, but also the National Guard. These were all fiefdoms. They were held by one prince for decades, in most cases. And so this diffused power, even though the king had the final word. What he did, what Mohammed bin Salman did very early on, was to get rid of these fiefdoms and centralize all decision-making in his own hands. And we have never seen anything like this. Maybe it was that way during King Abdul Aziz at the beginning in the 30s. Maybe that's the way it was. That was totally different times and climes at that. But this was totally different. And so he doesn't seek consensus. He seems to act on what he thinks he wants to do himself. And I think he acts more, or he has been in the past. Maybe things are changing now. He's acted, made decisions that serve his interest and not necessarily the national interest. Maybe this is changing now, but we'll wait and see for a little while. But he was very much making decisions that he thought would help him establish his leadership of the Arab world and global presence. But not necessarily forwarding the national interest.
A very interesting point, because he does, as you describe in the book, he wants progress fast, right? Soon. He doesn't have a lot of patience for waiting and seeing deal making, perhaps. And then you talk about some of the perhaps accidents and not that he's had, or his father had had for their rapid rise to power. So when you look at that and that kind of pace of change or reform, the way he sees it, of course, right? Qualified that how that came with actually a lot of repression and political revenge against certain groups and people. So how would you sort of, when you look at that in a country like Saudi Arabia, how is that going to really play out, that kind of pace that he's pushing?
Well, his pace, I think you have to distinguish externally and internally. Internally, this pace, this forcing of issues, so far been quite successful and quite dramatic. I mean, he has silenced the Wahhabi clerics who are holding up social progress, who have had an incredible grip over society. And he has acted very rapidly, very decisively, putting them in a box and stopping them from interfering in social change in the country. So that determination and that character he has of deciding what he wants to do and then really pushing hard to do it has worked in terms of bringing about social change inside the country. But that same character of impulsiveness and determination to have his way. Foreign policy has been a disaster. So you have to kind of look at, internally and externally. It's like two different people dealing with Prince.
Yeah,
Prince.
I have a question
Mohammed.
on that. I just wanted our audience to understand a little bit how you see his character and the way he pushes. So can you talk a bit about the impact of the Arab Spring, Saudi Arabia and MBS, his rise? It came at a moment that, a lot of people thought maybe, Saudi Arabia, the family was going to fall, just like that didn't happen. That didn't happen to most of the region.
None of the royalties.
None of them. I am always leaving myself, but yeah, you're right.
They came out still standing.
Yes.
The 8 monarchies. Yeah.
At the cost, right? Isn't it? Wasn't it?
Well,
how did it impact Saudi Arabia and what did they do?
it wasn't really. It was the previous king, Abdullah, that had to deal with the shocks from. But in his reign, you could see that before 2011, there was a degree of discussion and debate, and Abdullah talked to journalists and allowed them, even used them to try and change society. Actually allowed the media, Saudi media, to talk about the excesses of Wahhabi clerics, the way they were behaving. So before 2011, I would say the country was loosening up and becoming, there was more freedom of discussion. I wouldn't say democratic, but there was more freedom of discussion. After 2011, King Abdullah really began cracking down. The crackdown we see now, King Salman, Mohammed bin Salman, really has its roots in the latter part of the reign of King Abdullah. So, but they got through it. They threw money and they gave bonuses to everybody. Started a housing program, tried to deal with the issues, and they had the money to do it. And then they also, sent National Guard troops to Bahrain, put down the uprising there. So they used their muscle in Egypt to try to reverse the overthrow of Mubarak and rise to power of the brother there. So they became part of the counter revolution, if you will, in the Arab world, very much so. But so it really changed the debate and the tenor of Saudi Arabia after 2000, was the king, like all the monarchs. First thing that they were worried that they might spill over and affect their own power. But they came out of it okay.
Yeah. But how do you think that impacted someone's approach, MBS's approach to the region? Because I feel like his dealings and his approach to like you said, was in the Yemen, Lebanon, and some external issues, right? This was a region, this has been a region in flux.
Yeah.
You know, like
Well,
you said, Saudi Arabia became a country. And yes, do you think kind of continued that, and then how does that compare to his internal approach?
you have to, 2011 upset the American, there are three power centers historically. Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. The Americans did end Baghdad in their invasion in 2003. But the uprisings of 2011 also had a dramatic impact on Damascus and Cairo, and their central role in the dynamics of the Middle East. And it left this opening to Saudi Arabia to try and insert its influence and play a much larger role in its quest for Arab leadership. And that's when they started acting the way that Salman did, which was, calling the prime minister of Lebanon to Riyadh and forcing him to resign as prime minister, only to have that turned over when Saad Hariri went back to Beirut, and getting them involved in Yemen because they thought they could impose militarily a solution there. So they were flexing their muscles, their diplomatic and their military muscle, in trying to establish their leadership in the Arab world. So this came out of these conditions I'm describing, came out as a result of the 2011 Arab conference.
Yeah, thank you. It was, I thought, your book nicely describes in every opportunity, right, and how this came about, and you go back to even the first moment of creating that political security relationship with the US. You go back to 60s, 70s. You trace every current sort of phenomenon that is discussed around MBS. You trace it really nicely back to history, and it gives the reader a good context to understand these things that we hear about MBS. Oh, Khashoggi, but like, what is his attitude against dissidents first? And then we hear about, cinema, movie theater, women allowed to drive, and then you trace it back to actually there is a robust history there.
Sure is.
History about it. I mean, it was always an issue for Saudi Arabia itself, it seems, and you trace all of that. And at some point, you describe how MBS basically took on, the royal court members, different power centers, wealthy businessmen, critics, dissidents, the religious establishment.
That's the most remarkable.
Pretty much all at the same time, and these all have prior history in Saudi Arabia, but he really attacks all these issues, problems as he sees it, and then he confronts them rather radically, openly. What does that say about Saudi Arabia? Like the way you feel like you do mention that there hasn't been a major pushback. But there are, I guess, the biggest pushback was from outside with the Kashmir. But how do you think that he has been able to manage that, and what does that tell us for the user?
Well, he's done it by two ways. First of all, his father is a king. So if his father was okay with it, he could go on and do it. Even if his father was not totally okay, sometimes he wanted to do it. But he concluded the only way to break the logjam in Saudi rule, which it took months and months to make a decision about anything, was to move fast and to take down the independent power center, both financial fiefdoms we described earlier, and centralized power. One of the first things they did was to get a hold of the security apparatus and took it away from the Ministry of Interior and put it under the king, basically, i.e. himself. So he moved fast. He was determined to break down the independent power centers that existed in the country, and the tactic worked because his opponents didn't know how to deal with it. And his main opponent, Mohammed bin Salman, who was his chief rival, was crown prince for a while, suddenly became lethargic and made no effort to counter what Mohammed bin Salman was doing. And even went on vacation on a hunting trip in Algeria in the middle of the struggle with it. I mean, his behavior was very strange. Even though he was the head of the Council for Security and Military Affairs, Mohammed bin Nayef, in the middle of this battle, disappeared. So Mohammed bin Salman had free run. He had his dad's backing. He had the courage, took risks that were involved, and moved fast, and it worked. And even today, of course, he's made a lot of enemies within the House of Saudi, but he also has branches of the royal family that are backing him. He's skillfully attracted some important branches of the family back. And so you can't say he has no backing in the royal family. He does have backing a number of so he's been, I guess what's striking about him in terms of, he's really been a very successful Machiavellian internally. But on the other hand, he's been a disaster in foreign policy. And so he's created for himself two images. Inside the country, a reformer, he's got support from the women, from young people. He's effectively ended the rule of the Wahhabis. He's brought in, unleashed what I call a secular social revolution. Brought in all this Western entertainment. They've had bands and singers from America and Europe and Arab to them. But he's even having female wrestlers come in and put on shows. I mean, it's just extraordinary. He's created a real clash of cultures between the Wahhabi culture and this new secular culture that he's bringing into the country.
Thank you. You talked about this father's power and legitimacy in many ways, helping him accomplish his goals. He created a sort of buffer between himself and so it was very helpful. But you also point out major points of disagreement with his father, King Salman. Yeah. Can you expand on those?
Well, let's take a few. I think the best example is what to do about the PLO in Palestine. The older generation of Saudi still wants to see Saudi Arabia as the defender of Palestinian cause. And King Salman very much continues to support the PLO Palestinian cause. Mohammed bin Salman, his son, doesn't. So trying to support the PLO that squabbles within its own leadership and the division between Hamas and Palestinian Authority struggle. It hasn't gotten anywhere. And so when President Trump started pushing the Arab countries to establish diplomatic relations with Israel, we saw in Saudi Arabia, and it even came out in public, the struggle about whether they should follow suit, follow Bahrain. And we saw, strangely enough, the two former Saudi ambassadors to the United States, Prince Bandar and Prince Turki, taking opposite sides and arguing publicly for and against Saudi Arabia establishing relations with Israel. Finally, because the king was against it, and so were an important faction of the royal family, they didn't do it. But that's one example. And then what we heard was that the king was very upset over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, how it was done. And, there's no reason to believe he knew anything about it. It didn't take him long to realize what effect it was going to have on his son. While he publicly backed him, what we heard was that he was really upset about Jamal Khashoggi. So there were two examples where the king and his son had serious disagreements.
That's also quite interesting because, when Khashoggi, I'll ask you about it just a little bit, but when that happened, President Erdogan contacted King Salman directly. He was trying to get King to do something more than these earlier, denials and just like, oh, too. That was, but I want to go back to those foreign policy disasters. You call them disasters. Yemen, especially with Qatar blockade, I think we could include there. There was also Lebanon that you talked about, but in Yemen in particular, that seems to have created serious problems with Washington, but also eventually with every other partner Saudi Arabia had on that,
Exactly.
including the UAE.
Yeah.
Can you describe that?
Well, we used to call it the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Well, there's no coalition anymore. It's just Saudi Arabia and its allies, partners, whatever they want to call them, in that venture. They've all peeled away from them, and most significantly the United Arab Emirates. And the United Arab Emirates has come out of the Yemeni conflict as a much stronger figure, country, ally, partner of the United States than Saudi Arabia. And the United Arab Emirates has come out as even military power because they successfully either their own troops fought or they whipped together Yemenis that were willing to fight against the Houthis. But UAE came out of this conflict not only no longer an ally of the United States, because they are now supporting a secessionist movement in the South, but with a much stronger international stature. While the Saudis are saddled with this war, just causing all kinds of problems for Washington in trying to establish a more positive relationship with Saudi Arabia today. So Yemen really marks the end even of Saudi-led Gulf Cooperation Council of the Arab states of Persian Gulf. GCC, which is kind of the nucleus, closest sort of alliance the Saudi have, is just totally shattered. Qatar is going its own way. United Arab is going its own way. Oman always tried to go its own way, and so did Kuwait. So the only country there over which Saudis have any influence anymore is Bahrain. But the GCC as a unit has totally been shut. And you kind of wonder how what alliance the Saudis are now going to try to put together in dealing with this regional struggle for influence. Turkey, Iran, now Israel, and Saudi Arabia, four regional powers.
In the context of the Qatar blockade, you actually say that, it brought together, at least momentarily, Turkey, Qatar, Iran. And not only that, from that picture I get that not only Saudi sort of undermined the GCC coalition, but it's created other coalitions against its actions in the case of Qatar, especially. Although, the Qataris were very skillful in how to handle that situation. We did a book event on this as well. So that was very interesting, but maybe briefly comment on that, and then I will move on to Khashoggi.
Well, I would say Qatar always had more friendly relations with the Arab side to begin. And I think what's new is the Qatari, the boycott forced Qatar to look for new allies, and they found it in Turkey, which at that point was very much at odds with Saudi Arabia. So this caused even more problems for Saudi Arabia in trying to exercise its influence on its own partners in the GCC. The conflict also pushed Qatar to emphasize, it had to emphasize its independence of Saudi Arabia. It had no choice. And that's not going to go away. And I don't think Qatar made many concessions to get the boycott lifted in January of this year. The Turks still have their base there. Qataris are still supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Al Jazeera still goes strong. Maybe they've toned down their criticism of Saudi Arabia and what's going on there, but it's still there. So 13 demands made of Qatar, I don't think any of them inherit in order for boycott to be lifted. So Qatar comes out stronger than went into this.
It's interesting because from, again, your descriptions, Saudis, they ended up taking different routes in Yemen with the way and alienated, imposing an unsuccessful blockade of Qatar. The cool relations with Turkey, to say the least, because of the especially Khashoggi event. Like you said, MBS tries to achieve so much, both domestically and abroad. And as much as, he consolidated power, he took on the establishment and power centers inside the country, he also is a dreamer, right? He has this vision 2030, like you said at the beginning. He promoted it in the United States in an unprecedented fashion. And then this is a very ambitious leader and also a dreamer. But, Khashoggi incident in many ways dashed those dreams and hopes or put a major dent on it. And I don't think it will go away anytime soon. What is your take on that?
Well, even Prince Turkey, the former ambassador here, former national security advisor to various kings, has said he's going to have to learn to live with stigma over this result of the Khashoggi incident. He has been, Mohammed bin Salman, trying to overcome this by drawing in foreign companies to get involved in his fulfilling his dream. And he is having some success. American companies are getting involved in his, already gotten involved in his dream, which is incorporated and personified by Neom, the new future city, up in the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, which I visited December 2019. American companies are helping build it. Bechtel, which has had a major role in building Saudi Arabia historically, has now won the contract for constructing the whole. We're seeing the construction of this $500 billion project called Neom, series of cities or towns running down the coast. The Saudis are very interested in pioneering and being at the forefront of hydrogen energy. American company in Pennsylvania, hometown Pennsylvania, Air Products, that signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia this year to invest $5 billion in a project in Neom to produce and export hydrogen, source of energy. So you are, and then he's building all these new tourist centers down the coast. This is, these are huge contracts. So he is attracting in foreign business. Still far less than it was before. But it's returning. And I think he's trying to improve his image by getting involved in the soccer clubs of Europe. That he's finally succeeded, and now that he's resolved the crisis with Qatar, they're now allowing him to go ahead and buy Newcastle, the soccer team. So people call this sports washing. I was there one time. It was December 2019 when the heavyweight championship of the world was held there, and they're now holding annual golf competitions. They're trying to set up a super championship to compete with the PGA or here in the United States, PGA. So they're trying to use sports to get people to come there and to forget about what happened to Khashoggi. I'd say they're making slow progress in this policy.
That's interesting because in your book, you mentioned Newcastle United attempt, and you say it wasn't successful.
It wasn't,
but yeah, exactly. So that does that, because a lot of these he's just he lost some pace because of Khashoggi, but eventually get at least some of it, or companies will overlook that past 5 years from now, and then perhaps we can set out to sort of accomplish.
I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen. There's certainly gonna be a Shoji Day every October 2nd every year. Washington Post will probably always have editorials and articles and other people alive. The other thing that's happened is that you now have a diaspora. The young Saudis have set up their own human rights groups. There's one right here in Washington, Dawn, Democracy for the Arab World Now, which Jamal was in the process of setting up. It was probably one of the reasons he was killed. Almost certainly one of the reasons. There's another organization, ALCUS, which is just like human rights or Amnesty, putting out reports. So the issue of human rights, political and human rights, is being kept alive. And this all springs from Jamal Khashoggi's murder. So things are different now. The opposition has had to move abroad rather than petition the king or the crown prince internally, which is the way that we're doing it.
Thank you. By the way, for those on Zoom, please go ahead and send us your questions. We'll be able to pose them to David. So I have two more questions. Perhaps if you have questions from the audience, we will just simply move to those. But I have two more questions. One is on the Saudi-US relationship. You do outline what other theoretical, at least, options or practical options that Saudis have. You talk about China, Russian option, and that perhaps other countries, including Pakistan. So how realistic are those, and how do you see Saudi-US relations?
Well, the Saudis have been looking for other allies, partners to offset their heavy dependence on the United States. Ever since I started going to Saudi Arabia in 1978, and I went back and looked at my early articles just to see what was going on then. And one of them was their concern to offset the American over dependence on the United States, even back then. This has become much more important now after the United States. Even Trump refused to come to their defense when the Iranians bombed with cruise missiles and drones. There were 2 oil facilities in the eastern province in September here. So what I did is I looked at all the options they've been looking at, and pluses and minuses of trying to build an alternative to the United States as their more important ally. It is now the United States' commitment to their defense seems to be lessening. And they really have no good options. There are problems with every to take the superpowers, the major powers, China, Russia. Russia is very involved with their program. Russia, Syria, which the Saudis don't like, also. But the Russians have been offering both their most advanced aircraft, the Su-35, and their missile defense system, S-400. And the Saudis have been negotiating with the Russians about whether to bring them in to offset the declining American commitment. They keep saying no. They keep the Russians on kind of tenterhooks. Another possibility, the Russians come in and help build nuclear reactors. Because the Americans are insisting, the American companies are going to help build their reactors. They have to agree to not enrich nuclear uranium at home, just the way the United Arab Emirates is. But they haven't decided on that. So, because it would so antagonize the United States that their long-held fear of abandonment, total abandonment by America. China is not really into the military power yet to even protect the Hormuz Strait to ensure that oil reach China. So China is a good economic partner, but it's not a good as security partner, certainly not yet. And so, they're kind of stuck with trying to salvage their relationship with the United States. And under Biden, this is going to prove far more difficult than under Trump. And Trump, embraced them wholeheartedly, but he also abandoned them when the Iranians attacked the oil. So it's really a shock for the Saudis when Trump comes out and says, "Well, there are no American interests involved there. Well, we don't have to retaliate." So they've got to figure out how to rebuild or find something in common to do with the United States that's positive, seen positively, not negatively. There's an albatross around their neck in terms of dealing with the United States. So I worry the relationship is sort of spiraling south. And I don't see how it's going to be rebuilt or become any closer under Biden, who, after all, said Mohammed bin Salman should be made a pariah because of Khashoggi. And he hasn't said that since. And he did not impose any penalties on Mohammed bin Salman for approving, authorizing the killing of Jamal.
That's actually a Zoom question. Why didn't the US apply that to these visa restrictions to the US?
Well, if you want to go down that side track, I think Biden is very practical. Doesn't like Mohammed bin Salman, and I would be amazed if he ever invites him to the White House. On the other hand, we have business to do. And particularly if the nuclear negotiations with Iran fall through, then we've got to decide what the other options are. And we have the Israelis who would love to push us into a military confrontation with Iran. If negotiations fall through, then for the United States, Saudi Arabia is important to whatever any kind of military action or any kind of use of force that Biden may decide to use if Iran continues to negotiate to enrich uranium up to nuclear grade. So we have business. We certainly have a lot of business to do with them until we know whether there's going to be peace with Iran or possibly war with Iran. If there's peace, so let's call it non-antagonistic between Iran and the United States, then Biden will certainly double his attention to Asia. He's already started doing that. Pivot to Asia may finally take place. If there is no quote peace with Iran and it's more looking like a possibility of some kind of military action, then I don't think there's going to be anywhere near the kind of hesitation, and we'll be still stuck in the Persian Gulf and how to deal with Iran. So I think that the outcome of Iran could either move us farther apart or bring us back together in a common cause. Let's do about Iranians and their ambitions.
Well, you pose that question in the book, oil for security anchor in the relationship. No one exists. We've seen that with Trump, perhaps one of the most pro-Saudi presidents ever, and we saw him getting really upset with the oil prices when, MBS went out. He described that in the book as well, when he confronted the Russians by, flooding the markets with oil, and then
Trying to knock out the American oil industry. They hired 20 super tankers and dumped 40 million barrels of oil just as COVID was hitting and the demand for oil was going down, and they indeed put a lot of fracking companies that tight oil out of business.
Yeah.
In our production that was headed for 13 million barrels a day went down to 10. So it had a big impact, and it was such a direct attack on the U.S. oil industry that Congress really got mad. I mean, senators were calling Mohammed bin Salman and saying, "What are you doing? Continue this, we're really going to tell you."
Yeah. So in that sense, from the picture you're describing, I'm getting, unless there's a real renewed security common threat kind of thing coming potentially from Iran, anchor in the U.S.-Saudi relationship is going to have to be elsewhere, and that's not clear
I don't see
where.
I don't see what the common cause. I mean, we talk about the war on terrorism, but that's kind of waiting for us as a primary talk.
Well, when you're talking to Taliban, it's hard to make it.
Yeah. So, what's the glue that's going to hold us together? You know what it is now, it's selling them military hardware.
Which they can't seem to effectively use.
And they can't seem to effectively use, and then it's generating, a reaction to all the human rights and political rights groups in Congress and NGOs and so.
Let me get to two questions from so one of them, in your opinion,
One of my chapters is called "Who Will Rid Me of This Troublesome Journalist," which is a reference to King Henry II, who was 1170, said to his knights and squires around him, "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest?" That was Thomas Becket. Well, a group of knights went. So, but did he order them? You asked the question. I think that's the least he did. And the CIA thinks it was even more direct approval of the author. So I think everybody, certainly externally, to Saudi Arabia, and probably a lot of Saudis themselves, see him as responsible for the death. I mean, the best you can say is you either kidnap him or kill him. So it's possible he might have avoided being killed if he had not fought being kidnapped. That's possible.
you talk about the recordings.
If they were ready to kill him, I mean, they sent a team ready to kill him.
The other question is different. How serious do you think the Saudis are about developing renewable energy, solar, wind?
I think they're really getting into it, particularly hydrogen, wind power. The city of Neom is going to be totally powered by solar and solar and wind. But they're thinking about its role in the economy has changed. Right? Unfortunately, this change happened in April this year. And it was reflected in an interview that Mohammed bin Salman gave to a Saudi journalist, where he explained, and I wrote about this at the time, that he's given up on breaking Saudi addiction to oil. And in fact, they are increasing their ability to produce another 100 million barrels a day of oil. Now, why are they doing this? It's because their attitude towards oil has changed. They don't look at it as an addiction anymore. And they see renewable energy sources as a supplement, not a substitute. And they believe, I think this is another one of his dreams, the ability of the United States and Russia to continue to produce oil in significant amounts is going to end for the United States in 1 decade, and for Russia two. And then there's going to be a shortage of demand is going to go down, but there's going to be a shortage of oil, and they will be able to capture that remaining demand to keep producing oil. So oil is still very much at the center of their thinking, contrary to what 2030 was supposed to do, which was diversify their economy and stop their addiction to oil. He's decided the addiction produces a lot of money.
These days, it's about $80.
And he's sticking with oil, and the renewables that they are developing will be supplemental, or and may even allow them to export more.
Well, thank you. You earlier, before this session, you told me that the chapter you enjoyed the most was MBS comparisons to the other reformists in the Middle East history. So we don't have a lot of time for that, but I'm still going to give you a minute to talk about it. And those who are interested, you should be interested in the book. You should order it. It's selling out quick on Amazon. It's a very informative book. Last word is yours.
Well, in the last chapter, I got curious about what parallels and similarities and dissimilarities are between Mohammed bin Salman as a reformer and Nasser, Ataturk, Shah of Iran, Bourguiba of Tunisia, and Mohammed VI, the king of Morocco today, and the kind of reforms they carried out. In what way his behavior is similar and dissimilar to these other major reformers in the Arab world. I'll leave that for people to find out what I thought in the final chapter, but it kind of puts him in a historical perspective, an overview of, how reform has been brought about in the Arab world, 20th and 21st century. So I hope people will find it interesting.
Well, I did. I certainly did. It was a very enjoyable book. Once again, David Ottaway, Mohammed bin Salman, the Icarus of Saudi Arabia, ? Thank you very much, Dr.